The sun beat down on Harmony Gulch, baking the dusty main street to a crisp. It was a day for celebration, or so everyone pretended. Bunting hung limply from the saloon awning, and townsfolk, dressed in their Sunday best, sweated nervously as they made their way toward the church. Today was the day Jebediah Stone, the richest and most feared rancher in the county, would take a bride. Inside a small, sparsely furnished room above the general store, Sarah stared at her reflection. The dress, a hand-me-down from Jebediah's late wife, felt heavy and suffocating. It was a pale imitation of the dreams she once held for her wedding day. Her fingers traced the delicate lace, a stark contrast to the rough calluses that had formed from years of hard work. But it wasn't the dress that made her heart pound with dread. It was the dark circles under her eyes, a testament to sleepless nights filled with whispered prayers and silent tears. And it was the faint discoloration on her arm, carefully concealed by the long sleeves, a constant reminder of Jebediah's heavy hand. She flinched as a floorboard creaked behind her. Martha, the town's kindest soul, entered with a forced smile. "You look beautiful, child," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah managed a weak smile in return, knowing Martha saw through the charade. "He's a powerful man, Sarah," Martha continued, her gaze fixed on the floor. "He can provide for you, protect you." Sarah wanted to scream. Protection? Was that what she called it? Being trapped in a gilded cage, her spirit slowly crushed under the weight of Jebediah's control. She glanced back at the mirror, her eyes hardening with a newfound resolve. She saw not a helpless girl, but a woman on the edge, ready to fight for her own survival. The bruises whispered a warning, but also fueled a burning anger. This wasn't love, this was a transaction, and she refused to be bought. The church bells began to toll, their sound echoing through the oppressive heat. It was time. The memory swam to the surface, unbidden, as the church bells continued their mournful clang. Sarah remembered a time before the dread, before Jebediah's shadow had fallen across her life. She was a girl then, barely more than a child, running barefoot through fields of wildflowers, her laughter carried on the wind. Her father, a hard-working farmer, would watch her with pride in his eyes, his weathered face creasing into a smile. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Their small farm, nestled in a fertile valley just outside Harmony Gulch, provided them with everything they needed. Sarah dreamed of becoming a teacher, of filling young minds with knowledge, and inspiring them to reach for the stars. She spent hours poring over her mother's old books, her imagination soaring to far-off lands. But the drought came, a relentless monster that sucked the life out of the land. The crops withered, the animals starved, and her father's spirit slowly crumbled. Jebediah Stone, seeing an opportunity, offered a loan with impossible terms. When her father couldn't repay, Jebediah took the farm. He offered another solution, marriage to Sarah. He claimed it was to protect her and her family, but Sarah knew it was just another way to control them. Her father, broken and desperate, agreed. He believed he was saving her, but in reality, he was selling her soul. The dreams of teaching faded, replaced by the grim reality of her situation. Jebediah was a cruel and possessive man, quick to anger and slow to forgive. He isolated her from her friends, controlled her every move, and silenced her voice. The wildflowers in the fields seemed to mock her, their vibrant colors a stark reminder of the joy she had lost. The books remained untouched, gathering dust on a shelf, symbols of a future that would never be. Now, standing in that stifling room, Sarah knew she couldn't let Jebediah steal the rest of her life. The girl who ran through fields of wildflowers was still inside her, buried beneath layers of fear and despair, and she was ready to fight her way back to the light. The bells continued to toll, a countdown to a fate she refused to accept. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The church doors loomed large, casting a long shadow that seemed to swallow Sarah whole. As she stepped into the sanctuary, the air grew thick with anticipation and hushed whispers. All eyes were on her. Jebediah stood at the altar, a towering figure of wealth and menace, his gaze possessive and cold. His dark suit seemed to absorb the light, making him appear even more imposing. The scent of lilies, meant to symbolize purity and new beginnings, felt cloying and ironic. The organ groaned to life, its music a somber dirge rather than a celebratory hymn. Sarah walked slowly down the aisle, each step a monumental effort. The faces of the townsfolk blurred together, pity, fear, and a strange kind of morbid curiosity etched on their features. She saw Martha in the crowd, her eyes filled with unshed tears. A few other women offered small, encouraging nods, but most looked away, unable to meet her gaze. They knew what Jebediah was capable of. They knew the price of defiance. As she reached the altar, Jebediah's hand closed around her arm, his grip tight and bruising. He smiled, a cruel, self-satisfied expression that sent a shiver down her spine. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken her. The preacher, a nervous man who owed Jebediah a considerable sum, began the ceremony. His voice trembled as he recited the familiar words, each phrase a nail in Sarah's coffin. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She could barely breathe. The weight of the dress, the weight of Jebediah's expectations, the weight of her stolen dreams threatened to crush her. To join together this man and this woman. She glanced at Jebediah, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He saw her as property, as another possession to add to his vast empire. He didn't see the fire that still burned within her. He didn't see the desperation that fueled her resolve. If any man can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak, or else hereafter forever hold his peace. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the preacher's shallow breaths. Sarah knew no one would speak. No one dared to challenge Jebediah's stone. But she had a voice, and she was about to use it. Sarah took a deep breath, the air catching in her throat. This was it, the moment of truth. She couldn't go through with it. She wouldn't. I object, she said, her voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with each word. The preacher stammered, his eyes widening in disbelief. Jebediah's face darkened, his grip tightening on her arm until she cried out in pain. What did you say? He growled, his voice low and menacing. Sarah pulled away from him, ripping the sleeve of her dress. The fabric tore, revealing the ugly bruises that marred her skin. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. The silence was broken. I can't marry him, she declared, her voice ringing through the church. He hurts me. She lifted her arm, displaying the evidence of Jebediah's cruelty for all to see. The whispers turned into murmurs, then into outright gasps of shock and outrage. Some of the women covered their mouths, their eyes filled with horror. Even the men, hardened by years of frontier life, looked away in shame. Jebediah's face contorted with rage. She's lying, he roared, his voice shaking the rafters. She's hysterical. Someone get her out of here. But Sarah stood her ground. She wasn't hysterical. She was finally free. She turned and ran, her dress billowing behind her like a white flag of surrender. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay. The church erupted in chaos. Some people tried to stop her, but others stepped aside, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. Jebediah's men surged forward, their faces grim. They were determined to bring her back, to silence her once and for all. Sarah burst out of the church and into the blinding sunlight. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, her bare feet pounding against the dusty ground. She could hear Jebediah's shouts behind her, growing closer with each step. She had to get away. She had to escape. Her life depended on it. The taste of freedom, however fleeting, was intoxicating. She wouldn't let Jebediah take it away from her. Not again. A lone figure stood silhouetted against the horizon, a quiet observer of the unfolding drama in Harmony Gulch. He was a drifter, a man without a name or a past, drifting from town to town, seeking only solitude and a moment's peace. He'd arrived in Harmony Gulch just a few days prior, drawn by nothing in particular, just the whisper of the wind and the promise of anonymity. He leaned against the weathered wood of the general store, his hat pulled low over his eyes, shielding him from the harsh glare of the sun. He watched as the townsfolk, dressed in their finery, made their way to the church. He paid them little mind, his thoughts preoccupied with the endless expanse of the desert and the ghosts that haunted his memories. But then, the silence was shattered. A commotion erupted from the church, a cacophony of shouts and screams that drew his attention. He straightened up, his senses on high alert. He saw a woman burst from the church doors, her white dress torn and stained with dust, her face etched with terror. He recognized the look in her eyes, the desperate plea for help, the unwavering determination to survive. Jebediah Stone's men spilled out after her, their faces grim and determined. The drifter knew Jebediah's reputation. He was a ruthless man who brooked no opposition. He understood, in that instant, that the woman's life was in grave danger. He remained motionless, his expression unreadable. He wasn't one to interfere in other people's affairs. He had learned long ago that meddling only led to trouble. But something about the woman's plight stirred something within him, a long-dormant sense of justice, a flicker of compassion that he thought had been extinguished years ago. He watched as she stumbled and fell, her pursuers closing in. He knew he had a choice to make. He could remain a passive observer, a silent witness to her fate, or he could intervene, risking his own safety to help a stranger in need. The desert wind howled, carrying the woman's desperate cries. And in that moment, the drifter made his decision. His hand instinctively moved towards the worn leather holster at his hip. The quiet life was about to get a whole lot louder. Sarah ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching. The ground was rough and unforgiving, tearing at her bare feet. Thorns snagged at her torn dress, slowing her down. She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw Jebediah's men gaining on her. They were relentless, their faces grim masks of determination. She knew she couldn't outrun them. They were on horseback, as she was on foot. She needed to find a place to hide, something to give her a chance. She veered off the main road, heading toward a cluster of jagged rocks and scrub brush that offered a sliver of hope. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering mirage. Dehydration gnawed at her throat, making each breath a painful struggle. She stumbled, falling to her knees, her strength failing. Just as Jebediah's men were about to reach her, a shot rang out. The lead horse reared up, throwing its rider to the ground. The other men hesitated, momentarily stunned by the unexpected attack. Sarah looked up, her eyes scanning the horizon. She saw the drifter standing on a rocky outcrop, his rifle still smoking. He didn't say a word, his face hidden in shadow. But his presence was enough. It gave her a moment to catch her breath, a chance to regain her footing. Jebediah's men, recovering from the initial shock, turned their attention to the drifter. "Who are you?" one of them shouted. "Stay out of this. This is between us and her." The drifter remained silent, his rifle raised, a silent warning. He fired another shot, this time hitting the ground in front of the horses, sending up a cloud of dust and gravel. The horses whinnied nervously, their riders struggling to control them. Sarah used the distraction to her advantage. She scrambled to her feet and continued running, putting as much distance as possible between herself and her pursuers. She didn't know who the drifter was or why he was helping her, but she was grateful for the reprieve. It had given her a sliver of hope, a chance to survive. She knew she couldn't rely on him forever, but for now, he was her only chance. She disappeared into the rocks, hoping she could find a way to escape Jebediah's clutches. The chase was far from over. The drifter watched as Sarah disappeared into the maze of rocks, then turned his attention back to Jebediah's men. He knew they wouldn't give up easily. Jebediah was not a man to be denied. He moved quickly, using the terrain to his advantage. He climbed higher, finding a more defensible position among the rocks. He knew he couldn't hold them off forever, but he could buy Sarah some time. He fired another shot, forcing the men to take cover. He didn't aim to kill, just to delay them, to make them think twice about pursuing him. He knew that every minute he could stall them was a minute Sarah could use to escape. Meanwhile, Sarah scrambled through the rocks, her body bruised and battered. The sharp edges of the stones cut into her bare feet, but she barely felt the pain. Her only thought was to get away, to escape Jebediah's grasp. She found a small cave, hidden behind a thicket of thorny bushes. It wasn't much, but it offered some protection from the elements and a place to rest. She crawled inside, collapsing onto the cool, damp earth. She closed her eyes, trying to catch her breath. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She didn't know what she was going to do or where she was going to go. All she knew was that she couldn't go back. She thought of the drifter, the stranger who had risked his life to help her. She wondered who he was and why he had chosen to intervene. She owed him her life, and she didn't even know his name. She knew that Jebediah wouldn't give up the chase. He would hunt her down, no matter how far she ran. She had to find a way to protect herself, to fight back against the man who had stolen her life. She opened her eyes, her gaze hardening with determination. She was no longer the helpless girl who had stood at the altar. She was a survivor, and she would do whatever it took to stay alive. She began to gather rocks, preparing to defend herself. She wouldn't go down without a fight. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. The drifter, having successfully stalled Jebediah's men for a considerable time, knew he couldn't stay in his exposed position any longer. He needed to find Sarah to make sure she was safe. He carefully descended from the rocks, moving with a stealth and agility that belied his age. He circled around the posse, keeping them in sight but avoiding direct confrontation. He noticed they were becoming increasingly frustrated, their horses tiring, their tempers flaring. He subtly began to create diversions. He loosened rocks, sending them tumbling down the hillside, creating noise and confusion. He spooked a small herd of wild horses, sending them stampeding through the area, scattering the posse and their mounts. He even managed to cut the straps on one of their saddles, causing a rider to fall to the ground. These were small acts of defiance, but they were effective. They slowed Jebediah's men down, forcing them to waste time and energy. They also sent a clear message. Someone was watching them. Someone was helping Sarah. As darkness fell, the drifter finally located Sarah's hiding place. He approached the cave cautiously, his senses on high alert. He heard the faint sound of movement inside. "It's me," he said, his voice low and calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." Sarah emerged from the cave, her eyes wide with fear and suspicion. She clutched a rock in her hand, ready to defend herself. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you helping me?" "My name is Cole," the drifter said, "and I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do." He studied her face, seeing the fear and exhaustion in her eyes. He knew she had been through a lot. He also saw the strength and determination that burned within her. "They're not going to give up," he said. "They'll keep coming after you. We need to get out of here." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She knew he was right. She couldn't stay in the cave forever. She needed to trust him, to rely on his experience and his skills. She lowered the rock, her grip loosening. "Where do we go?" she asked. Cole looked towards the horizon, his eyes narrowed. "Somewhere Jebediah's stone will never find us." He had a plan, a dangerous plan, but it was their only chance. They would head for the mountains, a place where only the strong could survive. And he would make sure Sarah was strong enough. The journey to the mountains was arduous, a relentless climb through treacherous terrain. Cole, ever vigilant, led the way, his senses attuned to every sound and shadow. Sarah followed close behind, her body aching, her spirit weary, but her determination unwavering. They traveled mostly at night, avoiding the open spaces where they could be easily spotted. During the day, they found shelter in caves and abandoned mines, resting and conserving their energy. Cole shared his meager supplies with Sarah, teaching her how to forage for edible plants and how to find water in the arid landscape. One evening, as they sat huddled around a small fire, Cole turned to Sarah, his expression serious. Jebediah will stop at nothing to get you back, he said. He sees you as his property, and he won't let you go without a fight. Sarah shivered, remembering Jebediah's possessive gaze, his cruel grip. What can we do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Cole paused, considering his words carefully. There's something I can offer you, he said. Something that might give you a little protection. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a faded photograph of a woman and a child. This is my wife and daughter, he said, his voice filled with a deep sadness. They're gone now, taken by sickness years ago. Sarah looked at the photograph, her heart aching for Cole's loss. She saw the love and happiness in their eyes, a stark contrast to the pain and sorrow that now haunted his face. I'm offering you my name, Sarah, Cole continued. Tell anyone who asks that you're Sarah Cole. It won't stop Jebediah, but it might make some people think twice before helping him. In these parts, a name still carries some weight. Sarah looked at Cole, her eyes filled with gratitude. She understood the significance of his offer. In a society where women were often seen as property, a name gave them identity, a sense of belonging. It was a small act of defiance, but it could make a difference. Thank you, Cole, she said, her voice filled with emotion. I don't know what to say. Just survive, Sarah, Cole said, his gaze hardening. That's all the thanks I need. He then added, almost as an afterthought. It's my last name, by the way. My first name is. Well, it doesn't matter. From that moment on, Sarah was Sarah Cole, and with that name, she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of protection, a newfound determination to face whatever lay ahead. The mountains loomed before them, a daunting challenge, but they were no longer alone. They were Sarah and Cole, two strangers bound together by circumstance and a shared desire for freedom. Their alliance was born of necessity, an uneasy truce between a hardened drifter and a woman fleeing a life of oppression. Cole, a man of few words and even fewer smiles, was a reluctant teacher, but a skilled one nonetheless. Sarah, eager to learn and driven by the need to survive, was a dedicated student. Each day brought new challenges and new lessons. Cole taught Sarah how to track animals, how to build a fire in any weather, how to find shelter and water, and how to defend herself against both man and beast. He showed her how to use a knife, how to throw a punch, and how to use her surroundings to her advantage. At first, Sarah was clumsy and awkward, her movements hesitant and unsure. But with each passing day, she grew stronger and more confident. She learned to trust her instincts, to rely on her own strength, and to never give up, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. Cole pushed her hard, demanding perfection, but he also offered words of encouragement and support. He saw the potential within her, the spark of resilience that had been buried beneath years of fear and oppression. He knew that she was capable of far more than she realized. Their evenings were spent around the campfire, sharing stories and silences. Cole rarely spoke of his past, but Sarah learned to read the sadness in his eyes, the pain that he carried deep within his soul. She sensed that he, too, was running from something, haunted by memories that refused to fade. As they traveled together, an unspoken bond formed between them, a mutual respect and understanding that transcended their different backgrounds and experiences. They were two lost souls, finding solace and strength in each other's company. One afternoon, as they were practicing their knife skills, Cole stopped suddenly, his senses on high alert. Someone's watching us, he said, his voice low and urgent. Get behind me. Sarah quickly obeyed, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife at her hip. She knew that Jebediah's men were still out there, searching for her. The mountains, once a sanctuary, had become a hunting ground. Their uneasy alliance was about to be tested. The real fight for survival was about to begin. She felt fear, but underneath it, a newfound confidence bloomed. She was no longer just Sarah. She was Sarah Cole, and she was ready to fight. They ran, their pursuers hot on their heels. Cole knew they were running out of options. He needed to find a place to make a stand, a place where they could defend themselves. He spotted it in the distance, a cluster of dilapidated buildings clinging to the side of a barren hill. A ghost town, a relic of a bygone era, abandoned to the elements and forgotten by time. It was a desperate choice, but it was their only hope. They reached the town just as the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the empty streets. The buildings were crumbling, their windows broken, their doors hanging off their hinges. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. Cole quickly assessed their situation. The town offered some cover, but it was also a trap. They were surrounded with no easy way out. He positioned Sarah inside the old saloon, a relatively sturdy building with thick walls and a clear view of the main street. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Keep your eyes open. If they come through the front door, you know what to do." Sarah nodded, her hand gripping the knife tightly. She was scared, but she was also ready. She had come too far to give up now. Cole moved quickly, securing the perimeter, setting traps, and finding strategic positions to defend. He knew that Jebediah's men would be cautious, but they would also be relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had Sarah in their grasp. The silence was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Jebediah and his men rode into the town, their faces grim and determined. They spread out, surrounding the saloon, cutting off any chance of escape. Jebediah dismounted, his eyes fixed on the saloon. "Sarah," he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty streets. "Come out. There's no use hiding. You can't escape me." Cole stepped out from behind a building, his rifle raised. "She's not going anywhere with you, Jebediah," he said, his voice calm and steady. Jebediah's face darkened with rage. "Cole," he sneered, "I should have known you were behind this. You're making a big mistake, old man. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me now," Cole replied. "Leave her alone, Jebediah. Let her go." "Never," Jebediah roared. "She's mine, and I'm going to take her back, one way or another." A tense silence fell over the town, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows. The standoff had begun. The fate of Sarah Cole hung in the balance. Jebediah's words hung in the air, heavy with menace. Cole remained unmoved, his gaze unwavering. Sarah, peering through a crack in the saloon wall, saw a flicker of something in Cole's eyes, something she hadn't seen before. It wasn't fear, but a deep, simmering anger, a long-buried rage that threatened to erupt. "You don't know who you're dealing with, old man," Jebediah said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I have men all over this territory. You can't protect her forever." "Maybe not," Cole replied, his voice calm but firm. "But I can protect her today." Jebediah laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can stand against me? You're just a washed-up drifter, a nobody." Cole's jaw tightened. "I used to be a lot of things, Jebediah. Things you wouldn't understand." He paused, his eyes hardening. "I used to wear a badge." The revelation hung in the air, shocking even Sarah. A lawman? This quiet, solitary drifter had once been a protector of the peace. "That was a long time ago," Jebediah scoffed. "What happened? Did you lose your nerve? Did you finally realize that the law doesn't matter out here?" "I lost my family," Cole said, his voice barely a whisper. "To men like you, men who think they're above the law." He looked directly at Jebediah, his eyes burning with intensity. "I swore I would never let it happen again." He had been a deputy marshal, a respected figure in the territory. He had a wife, a daughter, a life filled with purpose and love. But one day, a gang of outlaws, led by a ruthless cattle baron, had attacked his town, killing his family and leaving him for dead. He had survived, but he was a changed man. He abandoned his badge, his name, his former life. He became a drifter, wandering the wilderness, haunted by his past, seeking only solitude and oblivion. But when he saw Sarah, when he saw the fear and desperation in her eyes, he couldn't stand by and do nothing. He couldn't let another innocent person fall victim to the same kind of evil that had destroyed his life. He was no longer just a drifter. He was a lawman once again, and he was ready to fight for what was right, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. "So, that's why you're helping her," Jebediah said, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You think you can save her? You think you can make up for what happened to your family?" "I don't know," Cole replied. "But I have to try." He raised his rifle, his hand steady. "This is your last chance, Jebediah. Turn around and leave, or you'll regret it." The standoff continued, the tension building to a breaking point. Sarah knew that the time for talking was over. The time for fighting had come. The silence shattered. Jebediah, with a roar of fury, signaled his men to attack. Bullets ripped through the air, tearing holes in the decaying buildings. Cole returned fire, his shots precise and deadly, taking down several of Jebediah's men. Sarah, remembering Cole's teachings, stayed low and moved quickly. She used the saloon as cover, peering through the windows, identifying targets. She saw one of Jebediah's men trying to flank Cole, attempting to get behind him. Without hesitation, Sarah kicked out a loose board from the back wall of the saloon and slipped outside. She moved silently through the shadows, her knife glinting in the moonlight. She crept up behind the unsuspecting gunman and, with a swift, practiced move, disarmed him. The gunman, surprised and disoriented, stumbled backward. Sarah didn't hesitate. She used a move Cole had taught her, a sharp kick to the legs, sending him crashing to the ground. She then retrieved his gun, her hands steady, her eyes focused. Meanwhile, Cole was engaged in a fierce gunfight with Jebediah. They exchanged shots, each man determined to kill the other. Cole, despite his age, moved with a speed and agility that surprised Jebediah. But Jebediah was strong and ruthless. He managed to wound Cole, a bullet grazing his arm. Cole staggered backward, momentarily stunned. Jebediah seized the opportunity, advancing on Cole, his gun raised, ready to deliver the final blow. Just as Jebediah was about to fire, Sarah appeared, her gun trained on him. "Drop it, Jebediah," she shouted, her voice ringing with authority. Jebediah hesitated, his eyes widening in disbelief. He couldn't believe that Sarah, the timid girl he had tried to control, was now standing before him, armed and dangerous. "You wouldn't dare," he sneered. "Try me," Sarah replied, her finger tightening on the trigger. Jebediah, seeing the determination in her eyes, knew that she meant business. He slowly lowered his gun, his face contorted with rage and frustration. He had been defeated, not by Cole, but by the very woman he had tried to control. But the fight wasn't over. One of Jebediah's remaining men, seeing his leader disarmed, made a desperate attempt to shoot Sarah. Cole, despite his wound, reacted quickly, diving in front of Sarah, taking the bullet himself. He collapsed to the ground, his eyes closing. Sarah screamed, rushing to his side. The final confrontation had come at a heavy price. Sarah cradled Cole in her arms, her tears falling onto his blood-soaked shirt. He was fading fast, his breathing shallow and ragged. "Cole, please," Sarah cradled Cole in her arms, her tears falling onto his blood-soaked shirt. He was fading fast, his breathing shallow and ragged. "Cole, please," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Don't leave me." Cole managed a weak smile, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and peace. "You're strong, Sarah," he said, his voice barely audible. "You don't need me anymore." He reached up, his hand trembling, and touched her face. "Live your life, Sarah Cole," he said. "Be free." His hand fell limp, his eyes closed for good. Sarah sobbed, her heart breaking with grief. She had lost another person she cared about, another person who had sacrificed everything for her. But as she looked around at the defeated Jebediah and his remaining men, now surrounded by the townspeople who had finally found their courage, she knew that Cole hadn't died in vain. He had given her the strength to fight for her freedom, and he had inspired others to do the same. The townspeople, emboldened by Sarah's bravery and Cole's sacrifice, finally stood up to Jebediah. They disarmed him and his men, their faces filled with a newfound sense of defiance. They wouldn't let him terrorize them anymore. Martha, her eyes filled with tears, approached Sarah and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He was a good man," she said, her voice trembling. "He saved us all." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew that Cole would never be forgotten. He would be remembered as a hero, a protector, a man who had given his life for what was right. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow across the ghost town, Sarah knew that she had a choice to make. She could stay in Harmony Gulch, help rebuild the town, and live a peaceful life. Or she could continue her journey, forging a new path, seeking adventure and independence. The townspeople needed her. They needed her strength, her courage, her leadership. But Cole had also taught her the importance of freedom, of following her own path, of living life on her own terms. She looked towards the mountains, their peaks bathed in the warm morning light. She knew that Cole would want her to be free, to live the life that she had always dreamed of. The decision was hers, and hers alone. The choice between staying and going was heavy, but the knowledge that she had the power to make that choice was liberating. Sarah stood at the crossroads, the ghost town behind her, the mountains before her. The townspeople watched, their faces filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They knew that whatever she decided, it would change their lives forever. She looked back at Harmony Gulch, at the church where she had almost been forced into a loveless marriage, at the fields where she had once run free. She knew that the town needed her, that she could help them rebuild, that she could be a symbol of hope and resilience. But she also knew that she couldn't stay. Not yet. She had to honor Cole's memory, to live the life that he had sacrificed so much to give her. She had to explore the world, to find her own purpose, to become the woman that she was meant to be. She turned to Martha, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't stay, Martha," she said, her voice trembling. "Not yet. I need to find myself, to see what's out there." Martha nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Go, child," she said. "Be free, and never forget what you've learned here." Sarah smiled, her heart filled with gratitude. She knew that she would always remember Harmony Gulch, that it would always be a part of her. But it was time to move on. She turned towards the mountains and began to walk, her steps firm and confident. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she was on the right path. She was Sarah Cole, and she was free. As she walked, she thought of Cole, of his quiet strength, his unwavering